Chapter 1. Black sails on the horizon. The sky above the western coast of Lustria was bruised with the colors of a dying day, sickly purples and fiery oranges blending like spilled blood and oil across the heavens. A warm wind carried the salt of the sea and the stench of something fouler still, something wrong. Birds fled the treetops, screeching their warnings as they scattered inland in erratic patterns, as though the jungle itself had sensed the blasphemy crawling toward its shores. On the cliffs above the beaches, a lone skink sentinel crouched among the ferns. His name was Quetley, his skin patterned like the shadows of leaves under moonlight. He clutched his blowpipe tightly, the carved obsidian tips of his darts glistening with poison harvested from the throats of jungle toads. But even he, practiced scout and whisper of the canopy, dared not descend toward the sands below. There, slicing through the churning surf like black fangs, came the longships. They were monstrous vessels of Norscan make, hidebound and scarred with runes of madness, their sails stitched from flayed skins, fluttering like the wings of some vast demonic predator. The prows were carved in the likeness of open-mouthed beasts, each seeming to scream as the waves broke against them. At least a dozen, maybe more, crashed through the tide, disembarking armored figures into the foam. The Norscans. They came ashore howling like wolves, their tongues rolling with words not meant for this world. Muscled giants adorned in jagged iron and horned helms, their bodies smeared with dried gore and covered in tattoos that pulsed with chaotic energy. Some bore twin axes, others great flamberges or hooked spears, and many wore armor decorated with trophies, shrunken heads, bones of children, scalps braided into their beards. They killed the moment their boots touched sand. The first sacrifice was a fleeing turtle, massive and ancient, lumbering back toward the sea. A Norscan berserker split its shell in two with a single strike, letting its steaming entrails gush into the surf. He bellowed in delight, scooping out the beast's heart with his bare hands and smearing it across his chest. They spread like fire through the outer jungle. Quetley watched with horror as they torched a patch of sacred mangrove, the flames revealing runic obelisks and glyph stones long hidden beneath vines and root. One of them, a chaos sorcerer with eyes like boiled milk, stepped into a stone circle and began to chant. The very earth trembled. The jungle moaned in protest. Beyond the mangrove lay a spawning pool. Hidden deep in a glade ringed by statues of the old ones, it shimmered with the phosphorescent light of life itself. From it had risen generations of Saurus warriors, born to kill and to protect. It was sacred, untouched for centuries. Until now, the Norscans came upon it with ravenous joy, tearing into the glade, their boots muddying the edge of the pool. A Kroxiger, guardian of the site and last of his kind from that spawn, rose from the water. Towering and thick-scaled, his roar split the air like thunder, and he charged. The first Norscan he met exploded into chunks of meat and chainmail as the guardian's maul, a weapon as large as a man, crashed into him. A second attacker lost his head, the spine snapping like a branch as it was torn from his body by the Kroxiger's jaws. But there were too many. Axes bit into scaled flesh. Spear points pierced between plated ribs. Blood, dark, oily, ancient, splashed across the sacred waters, polluting them. The Kroxiger howled as his tail whipped bodies aside, but still they came. One drove a spiked mace into the beast's eye. Another buried a dagger into its throat. The guardian slumped forward, breathless, crashing into the pool he had protected all his life. He died as the sky above went fully dark. The chaos sorcerer stepped forward, pressing his hand to the bloodied waters. He whispered something in his cruel tongue, and the spawning pool began to boil. The liquid seethed, corrupted. Glyphs along the obelisks cracked. The once serene glade shook as the very fabric of reality distorted. Something had changed. Something sacred had been defiled beyond repair. Sequel turned and fled through the canopy, leaping from branch to branch with desperate grace. He must reach the Temple of the Jade Moon. He must speak to the skink priests. He must awaken the cold-blooded vengeance that slept beneath the jungle soil. Behind him, the jungle began to scream. Chapter 2. The Blood Tide. The coastal jungle bled. It was not a wound easily seen, no great slash through the earth, no earthquake to sunder trees, but a sickness, subtle at first. The air had grown thick, humid with more than moisture. The scents of rot and burnt flesh began to replace the usual perfume of orchids and moss. Birds no longer sang. The insects no longer chirped. Even the ever-present buzz of flies held an unnatural rhythm, like the ticking of a cursed clock counting down. The heart of this corruption were the Norskins. They had established a base on the shore, a crude sprawl of bone-spiked palisades and canvas tents fashioned from the hides of jungle beasts, and worse. The longships had been dragged ashore like carcasses, their hulls bristling with nailed-on shields and rows of severed lizardmen limbs displayed like trophies. Fires burned day and night, stoked with wood and corpses alike. Inside the camp, madness reigned. Some of the raiders painted runes on their bare chests with the bile of a slain stegodon, dancing around the fire and screaming until their throats bled. Others wrestled, bit, and stabbed each other for sport, howling with laughter as bones snapped and skin tore. A drummer pounded at a taut drumhead made from saurus hide, each beat reverberating through the trees like a war harp. Skarvroth, the warlord, watched it all with impassive satisfaction. He was a monstrous man, his armor adorned with bronze plates stolen from a slain Toon King, his helm made from the skull of a carnosaur cub, the teeth still stained with milk blood. His left hand had been replaced with a black iron gauntlet in the shape of a demon's claw, its fingers twitching with unnatural life. He stood atop a mound of trophies, lizardmen skulls, shattered temple glyphs, even a stone idol of the old one Tepoch, split in half and used as a bench. Around him the captives whimpered. Skinks, at least a dozen, dragged from nearby nests and spawning pools, bound in thorny vines and left to bleed slowly for chaos rituals. Their golden eyes, bright even in agony, blinked with confusion and pain. One tried to speak, to chant a warning in its tongue, but a raider silenced it with a hammer blow that cracked its snout and sent teeth tumbling into the mud. The sorcerer, Ukher Bloodseye, stepped forward. His skin was leprous and twitching, robes stitched from stitched scalps, his staff crowned with a bleached lizardman's skull set ablaze by unnatural fire. He began his ritual. He traced circles in the sand with blood-dipped fingers, each line glowing with a sickly green light. The captives were dragged into the circle, their screams rising as knives fashioned from jagged obsidian were drawn across their throats. Blood pooled, steamed, and then evaporated into shimmering mists that twisted into the shapes of clawed hands and fanged maws before vanishing. Then came the scream, not of the dying skinks, but of the jungle itself. A primal grinding roar rolled through the trees. The camp froze. Even the most deranged of the Norskins paused mid-laughter. Something was coming, and it came fast. From the underbrush exploded a Saurus warrior. He was old, his crest faded and chipped, but his eyes burned with the fury of a star. He crashed through the palisade like a living battering ram, his obsidian-bladed club smashing the skull of the first Norscan unfortunate enough to stand in his path. Blood sprayed in arcs, spattering the canvas tents, painting the air crimson. Behind him came more. A strike force, small but vicious. 8 Saurus, each clad in sacred scale armor, moving with impossible speed for creatures so large. They did not scream. They did not speak. They butchered. One raider raised his axe only for it to be batted aside and his head taken clean from his shoulders. Another tried to run, slipping in the mud. He was impaled by a throwing spear through the back, the barbed point exploding from his chest in a spray of lung and bone. The jungle joined the assault. Vines slithered like snakes, wrapping around ankles, pulling down fleeing warriors into the earth where their screams were muffled. A flock of dagger-beaked birds descended from the canopy, pecking eyes and ripping at throats. Even the trees seemed to lean forward, branches clawing at the intruders. Skarvroth bellowed and joined the fray, his daemon claw glowing red. He struck a Saurus, the blow staggering the warrior, but not killing him. The Saurus turned, eyes locked on the warlord, and roared. It was a sound like stone grinding on stone, the promise of death in ancient tongue. Vedroth smiled. He drove his clawed gauntlet forward, and chaos magic erupted. The Saurus was lifted into the air, flesh sizzling, scales flaking away. The warrior thrashed but did not scream until he burst, his body torn apart in a cascade of bone and sacred blood. The rest of the Lizardmen knew their mission had ended. With a hissing signal from the lead Surus, they fell back, fading into the jungle with their dead. Not a single body left behind, not a trace of their sacred weapons, only blood and silence. Skarvroth stood alone among the wreckage, panting, steam rising from his body. He looked around. The camp was in ruins, dozens of his warriors dead, the ritual circles soaked in defiled gore. He laughed. "Let them come," he snarled, raising the Saurus's cracked club as a trophy. "Let the jungle bleed. Let the beasts scream. I am the storm." And somewhere, far above, hidden behind clouds that now pulsed with unnatural color, something in the sky watched. Chapter 3. Awakening of the Ancients. In the city of Tlashlan, where the jungle meets the stars, the temple pyramids pierce the heavens like the fangs of slumbering gods. Mist clung to the ancient stone, curling around glyphs etched by claws that had long turned to dust. Each step of the ziggurats pulsed faintly with geomatic energy, threads of magic drawn from the ley lines that spider-webbed beneath the crust of the world. This was the beating heart of the Lizardmen, and it was stirring. The winds of magic shrieked like wounded birds as they passed over the temple of the Starborn. Celestial alignments flickered and twisted, constellations blinking out like dying embers. A ripple passed through the great observatory spire. Scribes paused. Skink priests froze mid-ritual. The heavens were crying a warning. At the temple's highest sanctum, in a chamber heavy with incense and starlight, floated the Slan Mage-Priest Exoltep. His bloated body levitated inches above a golden dais carved with sigils of Chotek, Tepok, and Tlaskotl. He had not moved in centuries. Dust and fine moss had begun to gather across his arm-length fingers and sagging jowls. His skin was pallid and flaked like dead bark. To most he would have seemed dead. Until now, his eyes opened. They were not eyes in the mortal sense, but swirling vortexes of ancient knowledge, moons drowning in void light. As they blinked into awareness, a pulse of energy shattered the silence of the temple. Light exploded outward in concentric circles. The acolytes below dropped to their knees as arcane force cracked flagstones and tore tapestries from their hooks. Exoltep inhaled once, ragged and wet, like wind through crypts, and began to speak. But he did not use words, not as mortals understood them. Visions flared in the minds of every priest, warrior, and guardian within Talaxland. Flashes of black ships, crimson tides, the defilement of a sacred pool, the death of a Croxagore who had once held the line at the Battle of the Six Suns, a warlord's laughter, a chaos sorcerer's rituals, and then fire, the jungle in flames. The vision ended with a soundless scream, a flare of white so pure it scorched the soul. The city reacted at once. Gongs rang from tower to tower. Skinks sprinted across bridges suspended high above the canopy. Chameleon skinks darted from treetop to treetop, carrying sigils and barkquills etched with celestial orders. Deep in underground vaults, Kroxiger alphas stirred from stone beds, their eyes glowing amber as their minds synced with the will of the Mage-Priest. The most sacred awakening, however, took place beneath the Temple of the Starborn. There, behind 5 layers of enchanted obsidian doors, in a chamber carved from a single geode the size of a mountain, slept the cohort of the Eclipse, elite Saurus warriors spawned for apocalypse alone. They were unnatural even by Lizardmen standards, their bodies larger, their scales embedded with crystal nodules, their teeth like obsidian razors. They stood still as statues around a central plinth, where a great shell rested, a cracked ancient egg husk, once belonging to the first Saurus ever born under the gaze of the Old Ones. As the chamber flooded with light, a tremor ran through the walls. The glyphs flared. One by one, the Saurus began to breathe. Their eyes ignited with inner fire. They stepped from their recesses with mechanical precision, each one grasping a weapon forged before human empires had even dreamed of fire. Their crests snapped upright, their tails lashed in silent hunger. They did not speak. They were vengeance. "Above!" Jotep's voice rang out again, this time audible, a dry croak echoing through the temple's halls, shaking mirrors from the walls. "The jungle does not forget. The blood price will be paid in full." As his words reached the city's edge, the outer defenses activated. Massive stone guardians, automatons shaped like stegodon heads and serpent-bodied warriors creaked to life, their runes pulsing. Solar engines and laser-focusing totems pivoted skyward, drawing power from the dying sun. Skink artisans began carving sacrificial markings on jade tablets, preparing for rites that would summon storms and flood the invaders with rivers of sacred flame. But before the rituals, before the armies, there would be retribution. His shadow moved. A group of pterodon riders, skinks mounted on leathery winged beasts, leapt from the temple's eyrie. Below, a dozen chameleon skinks vanished into the trees like ghosts. Their mission: harry the enemy, cripple their leadership, and deliver the jungle's wrath one poisoned dart at a time. Tlaxlan had awakened, and the Old Ones watched through the eyes of every serpent, every root, every whisper of wind in the leaves. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 4. The War Council of the Cold-Blooded. Lightning forked through the twilight canopy, illuminating the Temple of the Jade Moon in violent white. Its massive ziggurat loomed like a sleeping mountain, crowned with ancient statues of reptilian gods whose eyes glowed faintly in the stormlight. Rain hammered the jungle like drumfire. Thunder rolled, but inside the temple's sacred chambers, silence reigned. This was a silence not of peace, but of calculation. The War Council had convened. At its center floated the slan Mage-Priest Exholtep, his massive form suspended by unseen magics above a dais of gold-veined obsidian. His eyes, vast and depthless, stared unblinking at nothing and everything. Around him, set in a spiral of descending platforms, stood the most revered and battle-hardened warriors of the Lizardmen, the cold-blooded pantheon of death made flesh. To Sholtep's right loomed Gortok the Stone Fist, a Kroxigor ancient with a chest like a fortress and a right arm encased in living basalt. His breath steamed in the damp air, and he gripped his twin-handed mace with the quiet longing of one who only found clarity in violence. Across from him stood Chief Skink Priest Ixcal, feathers of turquoise and gold bristling from his ornate headdress. His gaze was sharp, flicking from warrior to warrior as he hissed commands to attending scribes who carved each word into living bark screens with obsidian styluses. Arrayed behind them were the champions of the spawning pools, Saurus old bloods clad in armor encrusted with jade and bone, each with a different crest hue, each a living relic of bloodshed. Their bodies bore scars from centuries of war, talon tears, pike punctures, daemon burns. One had a brass chaos helm nailed to his pauldron like a trophy. Another bore a warp metal hook in place of a hand. Before the chamber's altar lay a map, no paper, no ink. It was carved directly into the floor, a relief of western Lustria formed from liquid crystal and enchanted quartz. As the council watched, it shimmered, flickered, then bled red from the coast inward. Chaos had landed. The defiled spawning pool glowed darkly. The area surrounding it was covered in crimson bloom, signifying corruption, sacrilege, and unnatural death. Ixcael hissed something in hieroglyphic. A flare of blue sorcery lit the map's center. An image hovered, grainy and flickering, but unmistakable, the face of the Chaos Warlord, Scar of Wrath. He was standing on a mound of lizardmen skulls, howling toward the heavens, blood streaming down his beard, one eye missing and still dripping. Behind him, a host of flame-eyed Norskins beat war drums carved from temple ruin. The chamber pulsed with restrained fury. Gortok stepped forward. He struck his maul against the stone 3 times, each blow like a miniature earthquake. The old bloods responded with a low growl that resonated from deep within their chests. It was not a roar of rage. It was agreement, consensus, war. The Mage-Priest stirred. His thoughts projected into the chamber like thunder rippling through the skull. This blasphemy will not go unanswered. The Old Ones decree extermination, cleansing, obliteration. A column of light erupted from the center of the chamber, and within it shimmered a series of glyphs, symbols of death, purification, and starfire. The council had been given divine sanction. Their orders were absolute. Ixcael raised his arms and began to chant. The chamber's walls responded. Hundreds of bas-relief carvings glowed, depicting wars waged in millennia past. Lizardmen hurling back Skaven hordes, trampling through vampire legions, tearing apart demons of every chaos god. These memories surged into the present. A great bell tolled across the temple city. The forges were ignited. Sacred weapons, blessed obsidian blades, serpent-fanged polearms, meteorite war clubs, were pulled from sanctuaries and kissed with fire. Skink scribes fed scrolls into altars, burning old prophecies to light the beacons. The air smelled of oil, blood, and burning sage. From deep crypts emerged stegodons clad in howdahs armed with solar engines. Ancient basilants, their backs bristling with crystal arrays, snorted and trampled sacrificial altars in their excitement. Pterodons were fitted with jagged sky spikes. Salamanders were stoked into fury with incense and pain sticks. In the heart of the spawning chambers, the newly awakened Saurus warriors, those of the Eclipse cohort, marched in silence, each step perfectly synchronized, claws gripping sacred weapons, eyes aglow with a vengeance carved into their very souls. No war drums beat, no horns sounded. For the Lizardmen did not march with fanfare. They marched with purpose. They marched not for glory, but for balance. For the will of the Old Ones, for the memory of every Kroxigor that fell, for every pool defiled, for every stone shattered by unclean hands. As the army of Tlachtlan emerged from the temple gates beneath the storm-lit night, Xeltep's final thought swept across the wind. Let the invaders taste extinction. Let them drown in blood not their own. And with that, the jungle came alive. Chapter 5. The jungle watches. The jungle of Lustria, vast and primal, had never been silent. It was a living thing, older than memory, more ancient than any empire. It breathed through the rustle of leaves. It whispered in the drip of rainwater off ferns. It pulsed in the heartbeat of every root and vine. But now, it watched. It waited. The Norscan raiders pushed inland, drunk on blood and arrogance. They hacked at the underbrush with axes dulled by sorrow's bone. Trees, some older than their northern gods, fell to their axes. They trudged through steaming marshes, laughing as crocodilian beasts hissed from the waters and retreated into the reeds. The jungle slowed them. Thick vines clawed at their legs. Mud swallowed their boots. Clouds of stinging insects enveloped them at dusk, yet they pressed forward, burning what they could not pass, killing what they could not name. They believed they were conquering, but the jungle was marking them. They never saw the eyes in the trees, slit-pupilled, unblinking. Patient chameleon skinks stalked them from above, silent phantoms with skin that shimmered and shifted with every ray of light. They perched among twisted branches, tails curled for balance, blowpipes already loaded with darts tipped in venom milked from the tongues of rainbow frogs. They didn't speak. They barely breathed. And then, without warning, they struck. The first dart found the neck of a Norscan scout, just behind the ear, slipping beneath the iron gorget. He paused mid-step, blinked, staggered. He tried to scream, but no sound came. His muscles seized, his bowels let go, and he fell, twitching in the mud, eyes rolling back to show only white. Another took a dart to the thigh and screamed, thrashing. Within seconds, his veins turned black. His comrades looked on in horror as he clawed at his skin, trying to tear it off before his heart exploded in his chest. Panic erupted. They formed a perimeter, backs to each other, blades drawn. But the jungle pressed in closer, movement on all sides. Shadows darting just beyond torchlight. Every rustle a threat. Every flicker of wind a predator's breath. The chameleon skinks moved like spirits of vengeance. One dropped from above, landing silently atop a chaos warrior's shoulders. In a single fluid motion, he drew his obsidian dagger across the man's throat, severing muscle and windpipe. The warrior gurgled and fell to his knees. The skink was gone before he hit the ground. Elsewhere, a Norscan brute stumbled into a pit of sharpened stakes, disguised beneath palm fronds and jungle moss. His screams were muffled by the sudden rush of blood flooding his lungs. He was still twitching as poison-coated barbs dissolved his insides. The jungle was feeding now. More skinks emerged from hidden tunnels, sprinting on all fours, teeth bared, daggers flashing in ritual patterns. They attacked with clinical precision, severing tendons, crippling knees, piercing kidneys. One warrior was torn apart by 3 of them, his arms pulled from their sockets, intestines slurping free like ropes of offal into the dirt. Chaos fought back with fury. Axes swept wide, decapitating a skink mid-leap. A sorcerer unleashed a bolt of crimson magic, vaporizing a tree and 2 attackers hiding behind it. A warrior in a bear pelt grabbed a chameleon skink and crushed its skull underfoot, laughing as green-black blood sprayed up his thighs. But for every 1 Lizardman that fell, 3 Norscans died. Their formation broke. They tried to flee, pushing deeper into the jungle, but it was no escape. It was the final trap. From the trees descended something worse. Pterodon riders. Great winged beasts screamed from the treetops, their leathery wings blotting out the moon. Skinks riding atop them hurled obsidian javelins with bone-piercing accuracy. One Norscan was skewered through the chest and lifted off his feet, slammed into a tree and pinned there like an offering. Another tried to run, only to be snatched by talons and carried screaming into the canopy. His cries faded. Then silence. Then a wet splatter from above. The survivors were few, scattered, blood-soaked and blind with terror. They collapsed at the edge of a vine-choked glade, the fires of their torches guttered. Rain began to fall again, washing the blood into the roots of the jungle. Then came the sound, a low rumble, not thunder, footsteps, massive, deliberate, bone-cracking footsteps. The sorest had arrived. Towering reptilian warriors stepped from the mists, scale-armored and silent. Their eyes glowed with a steady, unfeeling light. One carried a weapon the size of a man, carved from volcanic obsidian, ringed in teeth. Another wore a helm made from the skull of a stegodon calf. Their presence alone paralyzed the raiders. They charged. The glade became a slaughter. Dora's warblades cleaved torsos in half. Bones shattered beneath stone hammers. Skulls cracked like ripe fruit. One Saurus drove his weapon through a raider's abdomen and lifted him high, impaling him like a war banner. Blood rained onto the mossy ground in sheets. A Chaos champion stepped forward, roaring defiance, swinging his axe in a perfect arc, only for a Saurus to intercept the strike with a clawed hand, breaking his wrist before crushing his skull between scaled fingers like an overripe melon. When the last raider died, gurgling on his own shattered teeth, the jungle was silent again. Not peaceful, merely satisfied. The Saurus wiped their blades clean on the furs of the dead. The chameleon skinks melted back into the trees. Pterodons took to the skies with shrieks of triumph. And far away, in the temple of the Starborn, Zoltep smiled. The jungle had answered. The blood tide had turned. Chapter 6. Spears and Serpents. The ruined temple stood like a broken tooth in the jungle's mouth, swallowed by vines and swallowed further still by the choking mist of morning. Moss dripped from its shattered pillars like sweat. Glyph-covered stones jutted from the soil at unnatural angles, disturbed by centuries of creeping rot and ancient, long-forgotten violence. Whatever gods had once ruled here were silent now, buried under layers of mildew and lichen, their names lost to the jungle's slow digestion. But something still lived within its cracked heart. It was not faith. It was vengeance. Scar of Wrath stood at the shattered threshold of the ruin, wiping the blood of a gutted jaguar from his axe with the ragged banner of a defeated southern tribe. His eyes scanned the ancient walls, noting the patterns, the symmetry. It unsettled him. These lizard folk worshipped more than just beasts and stars. They worshipped order. The kind of order that offended chaos by existing. He spat. Behind him, a warband of hardened Norskins stomped through the vine-choked plaza, dragging supplies, prisoners, and trophies. One of them, a brute with fangs hammered into his jaw, dropped a sack. It burst open, spilling skink heads like coconuts across the stone floor. Offerings, he laughed. Urkar Bloodseye stood near the inner sanctum, one hand pressed to the wall, whispering to the runes that danced beneath the surface like embers under skin. His eyes rolled back. "There's something buried here," he murmured, almost reverently. "Something old, something angry." And the trap was sprung. The first warning was the hiss. Sharp, precise, like the pull of a serpent's tongue across dry leaves. Then came the dart. It struck the fanged brute in the side of his neck. He blinked, confused, then clawed at the wound. His lips turned purple. Blood frothed from his mouth in seconds. He fell twitching, frothing, dead, before his axe hit the stone. Panic. The warband shouted, shields raised, blades drawn. But there was nothing to strike. Only shadows. Only whispers. And then they came. Chameleon skinks erupted from the foliage, dozens of them. Their skin shimmered, shifting with the light, rendering them near invisible until they struck. Blowpipes hissed. Obsidian knives flashed. The first rank of Norskans collapsed in a spray of arterial red, clutching wounds they hadn't seen arrive. A berserker roared, swinging wildly. A skink ducked under the arc, spun, and drove a serrated dagger into the space between his ribs. The berserker staggered, gurgled, and collapsed into the undergrowth, his blood smoking on contact with the poisoned blade. Pterodons screamed overhead. Their wings tore the air, massive and leathery, like the banners of aerial death. Skink riders launched volleys of jagged javelins from above. One struck a Chaos Warrior square in the chest, driving him backward into a crumbling column where the force of impact impaled him on a jagged spike of fallen stone. Another raider was lifted clean from the ground by a pterodon's talons, his screams rising as he was carried skyward, only to be torn apart mid-slight and dropped like wet meat onto his comrades below. Blood rained. Scar Vroth bellowed, cleaving a skink in half with a single swipe. His warriors fought back, driven by pain and rage. One Chaos champion locked eyes with a pterodon mid-dive and hurled his axe. It connected, splitting the creature's throat. The beast spiraled out of the sky, crashing through trees and crushing a pair of its enemies beneath its dying bulk. But it was not enough. The temple grounds became a killing field. The jungle joined in. Roots twisted like serpents, grabbing ankles, dragging men into bog pits where they drowned in stinking slime. The temple stones shifted, revealing hidden channels that sprayed caustic venom into faces and open wounds. A glyph flared once, just once, and a pulse of solar energy reduced 3 Chaos Warriors to charred husks where they stood. Urkar Bloodseye tried to summon the power of his gods, but something coiled in the temple's core answered back. A serpent made of light, conjured from the ley line nexus below the ruin, surged upward and struck him. He screamed, his skin splitting like baked clay, eyes bubbling. When he fell, his staff clattered beside him, still burning with the shape of the serpent coiling away. Skavroth roared defiance, gripping his axe in both hands. He charged. A Saurus warrior met him at the temple's threshold. Towering, ancient, its armor carved from stone and star metal. Its eyes glowed like twin suns. They clashed. Vroth's axe struck first, cutting a shallow gash across the Saurus' chest. The warrior didn't flinch. It retaliated with a sweeping blow that shattered a marble pillar. Vroth ducked, slashed again, drew blood, but the Saurus endured. Each blow from its warblade sent shockwaves through Vroth's bones. They fought like avatars of gods. Steel against scale. Rage against duty. Eventually both stumbled back, bloodied and breathless, Vroth missing part of his helm, the Saurus's arm mangled. Before the fight could finish, more skinks dropped from above, pelting Vroth with darts. He roared in frustration, grabbed a dead comrade's body and threw it into the nearest pack, buying a moment to retreat. He limped into the jungle, blood streaming down his back, the surviving handful of warriors fleeing with him. Behind them the temple glowed once more. The Lizardmen did not pursue. They stood in silence, surrounded by corpses and steaming blood, as the pterodons circled above and the chameleon skinks vanished back into the mist. The temple had been reclaimed, and the jungle was awake. Chapter 7. Glyphs of Power. The survivors stumbled through the jungle like broken dolls, limping, wheezing, eyes wide with the blank stare of those who had glimpsed the fury of ancient gods. Blood dripped from wounds crusted with venom. Jungle rot set into open flesh. Fever danced in their sweat. Skarvroth led them, if leading was what you call dragging yourself forward by sheer hatred. His armor was cracked, his left eye swollen shut, his axe dulled by the bones of too many foes. He walked like a wounded bull, every step a challenge to the ground not to crumble beneath him. But his rage burned undimmed. They had reached a clearing, unnaturally circular, untouched by overgrowth. Even the jungle seemed to hesitate before creeping closer. In its center stood a monolith. It was vast, weathered by centuries of rain, yet untouched by moss. Glyphs pulsed across its surface in shifting light, neither gold nor jade, but something alien, like starlight forced into shape. The stone hummed, not a sound, but a sensation. The air thickened. Time felt slower. Urquhart Bloodseye approached it, hunched and burned, his body twitching from the serpent wound that still festered beneath his skin. His fingers trembled as he raised them to the glyphs. He spoke a word, not one known to mortals, not even to the gods. The monolith responded, with a shriek. The clearing exploded in light. Vines reared back like snakes. The air crackled with static. And then the glyphs turned, a slow rotation like the tumblers of a lock, and opened. The ground split. A stairway descended into darkness. Without a word, Urquhart stepped in. Ska followed, dragging his warriors behind him. One of them, fever-mad and raving, refused to enter. He ran into the jungle, screaming. He lasted 10 paces. A vine wrapped around his throat and lifted him silently into the canopy. His death was not even loud enough to echo. The stairwell led deep, so deep that the air grew cold and the smell of earth was replaced by something metallic, ancient. At its bottom was a chamber, perfectly round. The walls were engraved with more glyphs, millions of them, shifting and reforming in silent, incomprehensible conversation. And in the center stood a structure, unlike any the Norskins had ever seen. It pulsed like a heart. 6 crystal spires rose in a ring, humming, connected by arcs of lightning that snapped across their tips. At their core was a floating stone orb, inscribed with a single, massive glyph. Urquhart fell to his knees. "This is what they protected," he whispered. "This is what they feared we'd awaken." Scar stepped forward, wary. "What is it?" Urquhart smiled. "A cracked thing, bloody and ecstatic. A geomantic engine, a god-maiming, a weapon carved into the bones of the world." He touched it. Lightning screamed. One of the warriors caught the blast full in the chest. He was incinerated, reduced to red ash in a heartbeat. Another collapsed with blood pouring from his ears, his skull vibrating like a drum struck too hard. But Urquhart stood tall, hair rising, eyes turning white. He emerged. The machine accepted him. The glyphs began to shift around his body, crawling over his skin like tattoos of light, burning away his robes, fusing into his flesh. He rose into the air, his voice now a chorus of unearthly tones. "I see it now," he rasped. "The ley lines, the currents of power beneath the jungle, the veins of the world." He raised a hand. Outside, in the jungle, the ground trembled. Old stone walls shattered, rivers reversed, trees twisted into serpents of bark and leaf, and in the skies above, a star blinked out. The engine was awake. Back in the chamber, Skarvroth watched as Urquhart floated higher, glowing like a second sun in the darkness. His warband, what was left of it, fell to their knees, worshipping not the gods of chaos, but this power. Ancient, forbidden, pure. Scar's lips curled into a grin. "Let the Lizardmen come. Let the jungle burn." Now he held the weapon of the gods, and vengeance would echo like thunder through the roots of the world. Chapter 8. The sky burns. The sky split like a wounded beast. Flames licked the underbelly of the clouds, rolling in orange and crimson waves, casting the jungle in an eerie, blood-soaked glow. Smoke columns rose in spirals from the tree canopy, as if the heavens themselves were exhaling fire. The wind screamed, not natural wind, but something elemental, twisted, laden with malice. The Lizardmen knew the signs. The geomantic balance had been wounded. On the basalt walls of Flashless Blot, ancient glyphs flared to life, warning sigils pulsing like veins in fevered skin. The Slan Mage-Priest Sexholtep, now fully awakened and burning with power, sat motionless in meditation, eyes shut, but his mind expanded across the jungle like a storm front. He saw it all. The chaos-tainted sky, the rupture in the ley lines, the corruption crawling like a bruise beneath the surface of the world. A decision was made. Unleash the engines. From beneath the temple city's vaults came the heavy, seismic footfalls of ancient war beasts. Bastiladons. Their shells glimmered with divine crystal arrays, intricate circuitry glowing with azure light, powered by the geomantic pulse of the land itself. Each was a living fortress, bred in the time of the old ones for this very purpose, to bring apocalypse to the enemies of balance. Beside them, stegodons thundered forward, titanic creatures draped in golden war gear, their howdahs bristling with solar engines and ski-storm launches. Skinks scrambled across their backs, chanting prayers in trilling tones, feeding sacred crystals into the engine cores. Light began to build, soft at first, then blinding, a radiance not of flame but of something cleaner, purer, wrath without chaos. They did not march in silence. Drums of polished bone boomed. Choruses of skink priests sang the hymns of activation. Lightning danced between totems as the engines roared to life. Their destination, the clearing where the geomantic engine had awakened, where chaos had dared to reach for the bones of the world. The battle began before they arrived. Pterodon riders screeched overhead, trailing firebombs woven with sun glyphs. These detonated with bursts of scorching light, igniting foliage and panicked chaos warriors alike. The forest erupted in flame and confusion. Norskans screamed, clawing at burning furs, eyes liquefying from the intensity of the glare. War drums were drowned in the cacophony of death. Then the Lizardmen's heavy line crashed through the underbrush. The stegodons were unstoppable, plowed through a chaos shield wall, its armored crest goring a champion and snapping his spine like dry bark. Its feet crushed bodies into the soil, blood spraying like crushed fruit. From its back, the solar engine unleashed a beam of searing energy, pure and unfiltered. It swept across the battlefield, slicing through ranks of chaos warriors, vaporizing armor, flesh and bone in a single pass. Screams turned to gurgles, then silence. The Bastiladons followed, with slow, implacable precision. One turned its arc array toward a Norscan demon collar whose mouth was opening to speak a curse. The beam struck mid-word, silencing him forever as his body exploded from within, fire and blood pouring from every orifice. But chaos did not flee. They never fled. From the corrupted clearing came Urkar Bloodseye, now no longer a man, nor even a sorcerer, but something caught between. Glyphs crawled across his body, still shifting, still feeding. His hands glowed with unstable energy. His eyes were dead, not blind, just dead. He raised both arms, and the sky responded. Its lightning surged from the clouds, not golden but violet, black, crashing into the flanks of a stegodon and sending the beast into a death roll. Howdah shattered, skinks flung like dolls. One landed on a jagged stump, impaled through the chest. Another was crushed beneath the tumbling mass of scales and bone. Urkar walked forward, leaving a wake of blackened grass. He raised a wall of crystal from the corrupted ley line, shielding chaos warriors as they launched themselves into melee. A horde of them crashed into the Saras line, blood-mad, roaring. Axes bit into scaled flesh, swords clanged off ancient bronze. The air was filled with the sound of meat being shredded. Saurus Oldbloods fought with inhuman calm. One blocked an axe with his left arm, letting the blade sink in, then gutted his attacker with a swipe of his warblade. Another tore a Chaos Warrior's arm clean off and used it to beat him to death. A third disemboweled two men with a single swing, their intestines flapping wetly onto the mud. But Urchar was beyond any of them. He hurled arcs of dark magic into the fray, melting Kroxagar into puddles of shrieking flesh, causing Steganon plates to warp and curl like paper in flame. He laughed, deep, long, inhuman. His voice now echoed with layered tones, not all of them from this world. Then the Bastillidons retaliated. 3 focused their beams on the ley line engine itself. The corrupted glyphs shrieked as the light hit them, flaring, cracking. Yokar screamed in pain, a dozen of his glyphs dimming at once. His hands clutched his chest, but he remained standing, rage replacing fear. The jungle itself reacted. Roots tore through the battlefield. Trees erupted from the earth, slamming into chaos ranks like fists. Vines wrapped around the ankles of fleeing warriors and dragged them screaming into the underbrush. Parrots shrieked overhead as their feathers ignited with holy flame. The Lizardmen advanced. For every warrior that fell, 10 more replaced him. Cold-eyed, silent, eternal. And above them, riding the crest of sacred fire, a Bastillidon leveled its array once more. The beam struck Urchar directly. He screamed, not in pain, but in defiance. His body fractured. Light burst from within him, cracks racing across his torso like fault lines. Then he exploded, his form disintegrating into shards of light and shadow, a final gasp of corrupted power torn from the roots of the world. Silence fell. The battlefield steamed. The clearing burned. Craters sizzled. The few surviving Chaos Warriors dropped their weapons and fled into the trees. They would not get far. The Saurus would hunt them. The jungle would feed. And in the silence after victory, as the Bastillidons powered down and the solar engines faded, Exaltep's voice whispered across the jungle wind once more. Balance is not peace. Balance is war perfected. Chapter 9. Battle at the Emerald Meer. Dawn broke over the Emerald Meer, like a wound slowly splitting open. The sky above the swamp was a bruised mosaic of storm clouds and ash, flickering with unnatural lightning. The waters below mirrored it perfectly, slick, black-green, thick with algae and the blood of too many corpses. Trees with skeletal branches loomed from the shallows, draped in moss like funeral shrouds. The air was heavy, foul, and sweet with rot. It was here the final cohort of chaos dug in. The survivors of Skarvroth's warband, ragged, broken, but not defeated, had taken to the mire like cornered wolves. They fortified the crumbling remnants of an ancient Lizardman watchpost, raising sharpened logs and crude barricades of shattered stone and bone. Their skin was blistered with disease, their eyes wild with exhaustion, but in them burned a stubborn, suicidal defiance. Skar himself stood at the heart of it, one eye gone, blood crusted across his armor, a deep gash bisecting his torso like a canyon. He had not slept. He had not spoken. His axe was never more than an arm's length away. He knew they were coming. They arrived not with drums, not with horns, but with the rising of the swamp itself. The mire bubbled. The reeds trembled. Then the water moved, not with wind or current, but with intention. From the muck rose the Lizardmen. Proxigors emerged first, mountains of scale and fury dragging themselves from the shallows like primeval gods. Mud sloughed from their shoulders, blood mixed with algae on their warhammers. They moved in eerie silence, eyes glowing like sunlit amber. Then came the Saurus cohorts, stepping onto the dry banks in perfect formation, each bearing gleaming obsidian blades etched with glyphs of death and judgment. Their armor was camouflaged with swamp filth, but their purpose shone like a beacon. The jungle had sent its executioners. Chaos opened fire. Arrows, javelins, fire-tipped bolts looted from earlier raids. The swamp ignited in patches. Skinks screamed as flames caught their feathers, but the lizardmen did not stop. They charged. A Kroxigger crashed through the barricade like a battering ram made of bone and hate. The first Chaos warrior in his path exploded under the weight of his maul, his spine driven through his ribcage like a snapped tree. A second attacker leapt forward, only to be caught mid-air and torn in half, entrails whipping into the muck like snapping ropes. Saurus warriors flooded through the breach, slashing and stabbing with mechanical precision. Blades tore into Chaos flesh, limbs flew, blood geysered into the humid air. A war horn sounded, an act of desperation. Scar roared into the fray, his axe biting deep into the chest of a Saurus, cleaving through scale and sternum alike. But the Saurus didn't fall. It roared, a deep churning sound that shook the bones of every man nearby, and retaliated with a headbutt that shattered Scar's nose and knocked him back into the mud. He spat blood, laughed, and rose again. "Behind the Chaos line," sorcerers chanted. From their hands came bolts of darkness, whips of shadow that lashed at the charging lizardmen. One Kroxigor was struck full in the chest and burst into purple flame, roaring as he collapsed into the mire, his body sinking with a hiss. But the jungle answered back. Salamanders emerged from the water's edge, hulking reptilian beasts with steaming mouths, dragged forward by skink handlers, prodding them with glyph-branded spears. The handlers shouted sacred commands. Salamanders breathed. Fire rolled across the battlefield. Sacred fire, not like any known by men. It clung to flesh. It crept into armor. It sang as it burned. Chaos warriors screamed, dropping to their knees, their eyes bubbling in their skulls as skin melted from their bones. One man leapt into the swamp to escape the flames, only for a Razordon, its back bristling with barbed quills, to lurch from the shallows and impale him through the throat with a single snap of its tail. The tide turned. Chaos formations broke. Men turned to flee, but the swamp was no ally. Roots caught their ankles. Thorns sprouted from the earth. One warrior sank to his waist before he realized he was being eaten, the mire pulling him down, digesting him slowly, screaming all the while. Another stumbled into a nest of serpents, feathered, fanged things that struck again and again, pumping venom until he convulsed into stillness. Scarvroth fought on. He cut down a Kroxigor with a roar of triumph, leapt over a burning barricade, and cleaved a Saurus in twain at the hip. Blood sprayed across his face. He howled, high and mad, as if the slaughter were a hymn. Then the sky tore open. Above the mire, a pterodon rider dove from the clouds, javelin in hand, eyes locked on the warlord below. Scar turned just as the javelin struck his chest. It punched through armor and ribs, embedding itself in his heart with a wet crunch. He staggered, dropped his axe, fell to his knees, and died. Silence rippled across the battlefield. What remained of the Chaos warband threw down their weapons. They knelt, shivering, broken, surrounded by the hulking silhouettes of Saurus warriors and the guttural growls of the beasts behind them. But there would be no mercy. Not here. Not now. One by one they were dragged into the mire, held beneath the water by scaled hands until the bubbles stopped. The swamp swallowed their screams. The jungle fed. And above it all, watching from the tree line, skink priests recorded every moment onto bark combs soaked in blood. The prophecy was being fulfilled. The Emerald Meer belonged to the Lizardmen once more. Chapter 10. The Curse of Quetley. They came at nightfall, not marching, not roaring, but drifting, like smoke between trees, like a breath held too long. Their eyes glowed with no light of their own, yet pierced the thickest mist like knives through silk. The Lizardmen did not greet them. There was no war cry, no signal horn, no priestly chant, only stillness. For these were not warriors. They were vengeance. The Curse of Quetley had been unleashed. Once, Quetley had been a city of radiant crystal, a nexus of geomatic might, the jewel of the jungle's eastern edge, until chaos defiled it, centuries ago, in a raid so violent it was struck from most records. The Slann had erased its name from all but the most sacred texts, believing its memory alone carried ruin. But now, that memory had returned. In flesh. From the ruins they rose, undead lizardmen. But not like the husked cadavers of necromantic lore. These were not mindless puppets of dark sorcery. No, these revenants moved with purpose. Their bones were fused with jade, their scales shimmered with corrupted starlight. Some bore the rusted remnants of wargear fused into their flesh, glyphs that pulsed weakly with ancient commands. Their eyes, if they could still be called eyes, glowed with the burning teal of corrupted geomancy, flickering like candlelight in a storm. The chaos remnants who still clung to the jungle, fugitives, raiders, the broken dregs of Vroth's once mighty host, saw them first in the mist, thinking them lizardmen scouts, until they did not blink, until they floated instead of stepped, until the ground beneath them cracked and rotted. The first to die was a scout, alone at the edge of a collapsed ruin. He didn't scream. He couldn't. His lungs turned to ash the moment one of the cursed looked upon him. He dropped to his knees, hands on his throat, blood pouring from his mouth like wine from a shattered goblet. Then the curse fell upon the rest. They struck in silence. No growl, no roar, just the wet crunch of bone, the gurgle of crushed throats, the crackling snap of vertebrae torn loose from armor. They moved like liquid death. A chaos berserker swung his great axe, only for the undead Sarusi struck to burst apart in a swarm of emerald dust that swirled through his armor. Seconds later his insides boiled, his veins turned to stone, and his eyes popped like berries. Another ran, only to be tackled mid-stride by a half-mummified Kroxiger. The beast pinned him down and forced a glyph-covered stone into his mouth, shattering his jaw. The glyph flared, and he combusted from the inside out, his scream ending in a whimper as flames curled from his nostrils. Sorcerers tried to retaliate. One launched a spell of shadow, only for it to rebound from the chest of a cursed skink and turn on its master, reducing him to a hollow husk in seconds. Another attempted to banish them with a prayer to the dark gods. His tongue blackened, swelled, then burst. He choked on his own flesh. They were not fighting warriors. They were fighting judgment. The curse moved through the jungle like a fever. Anything touched by it began to rot. Stone, steel, flesh, even magic. A chaos banner crumbled to dust. A relic blade hissed and rusted in a heartbeat. A warhorn's brass mouthpiece turned green and snapped when blown. Only one man escaped. Barely. He fled blind, stumbling through brambles, leeches clinging to his legs, covered in his comrade's blood. He didn't notice the glyphs carved into his arms, glowing softly, pulsing with a rhythm not his own. He would run for 3 more days before he collapsed in a swamp, twitching, screaming about eyes in the leaves and fire in the water. His screams were still echoing when the jungle pulled him under. When the battle ended, if battle it could be called, nothing remained. No bodies, no weapons, no noise. Aniash. Only glyphs, carved into trees, etched into stones, burned into the air itself. Symbols that pulsed for a moment longer, then faded like dying stars. Far above, in the Temple of the Jade Moon. Zoltep opened his eyes. He had felt it. The engine had purged itself. The balance had corrected. Quetley's name could be spoken again. But only in whispers, only in reverence. For the curse had been fulfilled. And though the dead had returned to sleep beneath the earthen vines, their message remained. There are fates worse than death. There is just as older than gods, and in Lustria nothing is ever truly gone. Chapter 11. Skulls for the Gods. Smoke bloomed on the horizon like black blossoms unfurling in a sky too long untouched by light. Charred branches clawed at the air. Ash fell like snow. Lustria wept, but its tears were blood. In a scorched clearing ringed by the broken ribs of shattered temples, the last true warband of chaos stood. Or what remained of it. They were fewer now, leaner, meaner. Desperation had tempered them into a single jagged edge. Each man had lost something, an eye, a hand, a brother, a soul. In return, they had gained hunger, not for meat, not for conquest, for meaning, for a reason they had suffered so long beneath this unholy canopy. They had found it. In the shattered basin of a temple desecrated long ago, Skarvroth's surviving champion, Mordhak Iron Eye, performed the ritual. A pit had been dug in the stone. It was filled with blood, thick, clotted, bubbling, pulled from the still warm bodies of captive skinks and even fallen comrades. Bones surrounded it, lashed into totems and spires, crowned with human skulls and jaguar fangs. Mordhak stood shirtless, his scarred chest coated in glyphs painted with coagulated gore. The air shimmered around him. His axe, massive and rust-fanged, quivered in the ground where he had buried it blade first. He spoke in a tongue not taught, but screamed through dreams. "In your name, Skullfather, we burn this world," he growled, voice crackling with pain. "In your glory we offer blood. In your rage we offer ourselves." The warriors chanted with him. "Skulls for the Skull Throne, blood for the Blood God," it echoed, not just through the air, but beneath it. The blood pit hissed, steaming. Something stirred below. The jungle grew still. No bird song, no insect hum. The world held its breath. Mordhak drew his dagger, jagged, bronze, encrusted with filth and favor, and slashed his own palm. Blood poured freely. He dripped it into the pit. The reaction was immediate. A shockwave burst from the basin, flinging bone totems outward. Trees snapped, wind howled, fire raced across the clearing in a spiral of screaming light. The air stank of iron and rot. The ground split, and from the depths rose the demon. It had no name, no true form. A blood-soaked hurricane of teeth and muscle, clothed in armor forged from the soul metal of the warp. Its eyes were burning coals. Its mouth was a bottomless maw of jagged bone. Each breath was a furnace blast, boiling the air. It stood 3 stories tall, every movement screaming violence. The demon did not speak. The clearing exploded into chaos. Half the Chaos Warriors dropped to their knees, gibbering with ecstasy. The other half tried to run, their minds shattered by the mere presence of what they had summoned. Mordhak stood still, blood weeping from his eyes. "We give you the jungle," he whispered. "We give you the beasts." The demon turned its gaze southward, toward the heart of Lustria. Toward Tlaxtlan. Began to march. Each footfall scorched the earth. Jungle animals disintegrated as it passed. Trees burst into flame. The geomantic weave of the world tore. Every step the daemon took twisted the ley lines, warping the pulse of the land. But the Lizardmen had seen this. Mage-Priest Exotep, far away upon his golden throne, writhed, not from fear, but from strain. His eyes snapped open. His mouth spoke words so old they had no sound, only meaning. He began the counter-ritual. A call to the stars, building ancient energies buried beneath the world. Temples across Lustria ignited, beacons of light piercing the smoke-thick sky. Crystal obelisks resonated, ley-line nodes hummed, forgotten glyphs on jungle stones flared with teal fire. And from the jungle floor, beneath vines and roots, Lizardmen legions awoke. These were not the fresh spawnings of temple pools. These were the veterans. Tsarist warriors birthed in the age of the First War. Kroxagor bull kings whose bloodlines had torn daemons limb from limb. Temple guard whose eyes had seen the stars fall. Their armor was etched with a language no man could read. Their weapons were older than kingdoms. They did not speak. They simply marched toward the bloodstorm. The demon howled, sensing its prey. It ripped through the jungle like a meteor, tearing apart trees, uprooting monoliths, crushing beasts. One unfortunate stegodon, caught alone, tried to charge. The demon swatted it aside, shattering its skull with a backhand blow that launched it 50 feet into a rock wall. It didn't even slow. Mordhak followed, eyes alight with fanatic joy. Around him the warband tore into madness, some killing each other in their ecstasy, others sacrificing themselves by leaping into the flames of the daemon's wake. They would all die. But their god had arrived, and the jungle would bleed. Chapter 12. The Doom of Zolteb. Tlaxlan trembled. The ground beneath the temple city rippled like the surface of disturbed water. Fountains of turquoise light erupted from ley-line wells as the geomantic networks strained beneath the weight of corruption. Sacred glyphs etched into stone walls shattered, their power dimmed. High above, the stars swirled into strange new alignments, ones not charted in any skink prophecy. The demon was coming, and not alone. Behind it marched the shattered remnants of chaos, reformed and rekindled by madness. Mordhak Iron Eye led the charge, his armor painted in dried blood, his mind lost to the whispers of a god that only screamed. War banners torn from Lizardmen corpses flapped in the wind, now inverted, defiled, restitched into blasphemous tapestries that bled when touched. The jungle burned in their wake. Trees blackened and crumbled. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Sacred beasts howled in confusion, fleeing or going feral as the warp gnawed at reality. On the summit of the Pyramid of the Starborn, Slan Mage-Priest Exholtep sat upon his golden palanquin. He had not moved in hours, not blinked, not breathed. But he was working. A ring of skink priests surrounded him, their eyes wide, their arms raised. Incense poured from censers. Crystal orbs hovered in the air, spinning with mad velocity. Above them, a solar flare arced through the clouded sky, drawn unnaturally close, casting everything in an apocalyptic amber. Beneath the temple, machines forgotten since the First Age rumbled to life. Massive cogs turned. Runes pulsed. Stone colossi groaned in the depths. Ancient constructs built for no purpose other than to guard the weave of the world. Joltep's eyes snapped open. They were stars. 2 miniature galaxies burning in the sockets of a body more spirit than flesh. He rose, not by legs, but by will alone, the air folding around his form as if the world itself held its breath. "Bring the beacon," he spoke. His voice echoed across the city, not by sound, but by command. Every Lizardman felt it resonate in their blood. Warriors froze mid-preparation. Priests wept. Even the cold-blooded Kroxagors paused, bowing instinctively. From the deepest sanctum of Tlaxlan, a great slab was carried forward. The beacon of Tepa, a relic of impossible power, one of the keys to geomantic collapse or restoration, inscribed with glyphs that moved of their own accord. It was as much a weapon as it was a prophecy. It would be his final spell. The daemon arrived at the gates. Its bellows split the sky. Birds exploded in the air. The jungle recoiled. It stood taller than any creature in the mortal world, a mountain of hatred and muscle wrapped in plates of molten iron. Its eyes were pits of hunger. Its breath stank of ash and blood. With a single step it crushed a spawning pool. The waters hissed, skinks screamed, the ground cracked like glass. Then the battle began. The temple guard charged first, unflinching, unblinking. Their war blades met demon flesh with divine fury, carving deep, but not enough. The beast backhanded a dozen across the courtyard, their bodies folding like parchment. One struck a pillar and exploded into mist. Croxigors leapt forward, hammering its legs with colossal mauls, bones shattered beneath scale and sinew. The demon staggered, roaring. It turned, and from its maw spewed a torrent of crimson flame. 2 Croxigors were vaporized. A third crawled forward, body half gone, swinging his hammer until the very end, until the demon stomped him into paste. Pterodon riders swooped from the sky, dropping crystal-tipped javelins that detonated with divine fire. One struck true, embedding in the demon's shoulder. It howled, tore the spike free, and hurled it back. The javelin impaled a pterodon and its rider in one shot, pinning them to the face of the pyramid. Then Shaltep moved. He descended in silence, floating down the temple steps like a falling star. The beacon of Tepak hovered beside him, glowing with terrifying intensity. He extended one arm. The sky responded. Clouds parted. Light poured down in a singular, blinding shaft. Pure, white, whole. The demon screeched. Its flesh began to peel. Not burn. Peel. Strips of essence lifted away, dissolving into smoke as the beam bathed it in anti-corruption. It clawed the air, roaring, stumbling back. But it didn't flee. It charged. Straight at Zoltep. The slan did not move. He uttered one word. The ground cracked open beneath the demon's feet. Chains of starlight erupted, coiling around its limbs, searing into its flesh. It roared again, but its stride faltered. It reached for the slan, claws inches away. Then Zoltep unleashed the final spell. The beacon of Tepak detonated. Not in fire, not in thunder, but in purity. A blinding pulse of geomantic force tore through the battlefield. Glyphs ignited in mid-air. Ancient runes burned into reality. The ley lines realigned with an audible snap, like the bones of the world snapping back into place. The demon screamed. Its body fragmented, chunks of corrupted matter tearing away, sucked into the void between worlds. Its scream became 1,000 screams. Then 1,000 more. It imploded, leaving only fire, ash, and silence. Shaltep fell, his palanquin shattered beneath him, his eyes dimmed, his skin cracked. He hit the temple stones like a fallen god. The Lizardmen stood still. The battle was over. Their city was scorched, their sacred pools shattered. Their greatest protector lay dying. But the demon was gone. Balance was restored. And in the final light of the beacon's last glow, Ixhotep smiled. The world would spin a little longer. Chapter 13. Into the City of Stars. They crossed the shattered threshold at dusk. The remnants of the Chaos Force, no longer a warband, merely scattered scavengers clinging to defiled steel and delirious faith, staggered through the overgrown gate of the forgotten city. Their torches flickered, barely lighting the labyrinth beyond. This was not Traxland. This was Oxzar, the twin once hidden in shadow. A city the old ones had veiled in misdirection and myth, sunk beneath the jungle canopy, locked behind wards and glyphs that had only now, after the demon's death, been disrupted. No records marked its location, no skink dared whisper its name. Until now, the air was wrong. Not foul. There were no insects, no birds. Not even the crackle of torch fire seemed to echo right. The buildings loomed, impossibly large, carved from star metal and glacial jade, their surfaces smooth yet shifting like solid water. Every wall was etched with glyphs that moved when not looked at, rearranging themselves as if rewriting reality in real time. Mordhak Iron Eye led the survivors. His face was torn, one eye a cauterized socket that still wept steam. His blade was notched, his armor broken, but he walked as if possessed. Maybe he was. Whatever whispered in his mind since the demon's death had led him here. He believed there would be answers. Instead, there were reflections. The first sign something was wrong came when a man cried out behind them, not from pain, but confusion. The others turned. He stood staring into the darkened window of a temple tower, shaking. I saw myself, he muttered, but not me. It spoke. It screamed. Then his head twisted backward with a wet crack, turning too far, eyes rolling as if forced by invisible hands. His spine snapped, his body folding forward like an offering, and the shadows swallowed him whole. No one touched him. No one could. Then the city spoke. It wasn't words, it was sensation, sickness in the gut, vertigo, cold sweat across the groin. Glyphs pulsed on every surface, the stones beneath their boots rippled. One man dropped his torch as his boots began to sink, not into mud, but into stone that had turned liquid. He screamed as it hardened again, sealing around his legs. Another warrior tried to pull him free, but their hands fused together on contact. Flesh became one. They screamed and screamed until the stone opened again and pulled them both under. The rest ran. Not toward salvation, there was none. Only inward. Through archways too tall for men, over bridges that vanished behind them, streets reconfigured when not observed. Some turned corners and vanished entirely. Others found themselves walking in loops, the same glyph-covered obelisk appearing again and again, the blood of their lost companions somehow already dried on its base. Then came the constructs. They did not walk. They floated. Statues of obsidian and gold, in the shape of reptilian gods, their limbs shifting between forms, blades, spears, claws, none constant. Their eyes were burning sockets of unfeeling light. They didn't hunt. They waited, watching, turning only when chaos came close. When they struck, it was instant. One blade arm pierced 3 men in a blink, lifting them from the ground. Another split a raider vertically, cleanly, like a butcher slicing meat. No blood touched the ground. The city absorbed it. A champion of Nurgle tried to fight back, vomiting bile, raising his rusted flail. The construct paused, scanned him, and unleashed a beam of light that turned the champion into polished glass. He toppled backward and shattered into 1,000 glittering shards. Mordhak pressed forward, desperate. A temple stood at the city's core, massive, glowing, whispering his name in a voice he didn't know. He ascended the steps, boots echoing on stone older than dreams. Inside was no altar, only a mirror. A great obsidian disk, 10 feet high, floating silently above a dais of shifting starlight. The moment he stepped before it, his reflection moved on its own. It grinned. Then it spoke. "I know why you came," it whispered. "You seek meaning in ruin. You seek chaos in clarity." Mordhak raised his weapon. The reflection did the same. He lunged. So did it. Their blades met, and he screamed, not from pain but from knowledge. It showed him every sin, every betrayal, every soul crushed in his march for glory. It showed him the truth. He was nothing, not chosen, not blessed, just used, a conduit, a means to an end, and now discarded. The mirror shattered. He fell to his knees. All around him the city pulsed once more. The walls shifted, the glyphs flared, the constructs turned and marched inward. The survivors screamed. One by one, they were unmade. Not killed, forgotten. The jungle reclaimed the ruins, and the stars above Oxzar blinked, one by one, out. Chapter 14. The Silent Host. They came with no sound, no horns, no drums, no beast calls or roars. The jungle trembled, not with noise, but with presence. Leaves wilted in their wake, water stilled. Even the insects vanished, crawling into the earth to hide from something older than fear. The silent host had awakened. They were temple guard, but not the ones seen marching in lines beneath the sun. These were ancient, sacred, buried long ago beneath layers of obsidian and prayer. Each had been interred within a crypt forged of jade, their duty not to guard a person but a truth. Their spawnings were unique, gifted by the old ones for one task alone: to march when the world itself trembled, to finish what others could not. They rose from sacred vaults deep beneath Tlashland, through tunnels sealed by forgotten spells, their armor crusted in time and fossilized blood. No skink had seen them hatch, no slan had summoned them since the time of cleansing, but something in the world had shifted, something in the wind whispered of unfinished war. And so they moved. Their shields bore glyphs that shimmered in the dark, not from firelight, but from memory. Their obsidian blades were blacker than night, honed by time and reverence. Their eyes held no whites, only twin orbs of golden burn, like the eternal gaze of judgment. The last of the chaos plague had taken root on the border of the broken leyline ridge. A degenerate cult had grown there, formed from survivors too far gone, too deeply mutated to return north. Their bodies were twisted, clawed, fused with iron and bone, screaming sermons in tongues that bled from their mouths like sludge. They had made a nest, a malformed altar of bone and broken Lizardman relics, atop which writhed a chaos-afformed abomination. Part demon, part flesh, part sorrow. A swollen, twitching thing, with tendrils that wept blood and eyes that blinked from its stomach. They called it the new prophet. They fed it children. They prayed for dominion. The silent host arrived at dawn. The sky did not lighten. The jungle did not stir. The cultists noticed only when the birds fell from the trees, dead, unmarked. The prophet let out a wet, croaking whimper. Then the Lizardmen attacked. No war cry, no signal, just death. One temple guard stepped from the fog and hurled his spear, carved with runes of Tlashkotl, the silent protector, and impaled a cultist mid-chant. The force of impact drove the body through the altar, splitting it in half. The body didn't stop twitching. The Lizardman didn't stop advancing. The others followed. 24, no more. They didn't need more. One cleaved through 3 mutants with a single downward stroke, splitting heads and torsos in one smooth arc. Blood sprayed. Another decapitated a screaming priestess mid-word, her tongue still twitching in her skull as it landed. Chaos retaliated. They charged in droves, misshapen things, clawed and spiked, some crawling like spiders, others bounding like dogs. They shrieked praise to the dark gods. They slashed and bit and tore. But the temple guard did not slow, and caught 3 blades in his chest. He did not fall. He stepped forward, crushing his attackers beneath his weight, then brought his shield down with such force the ground cracked. Bones splintered like brittle bark. Viscera painted the sacred stones. Another was set ablaze, green fire curling across his back. He did not scream. He plunged his blade into the heart of the fire wielder, then knelt beside a pool of sacred oil. The flames hissed and died. His eyes never moved. The prophet itself reared up, dozens of mouths opening in unison, chanting, casting, birthing sorcery. The host stopped, formed a circle, lowered their blades. One among them stepped forward, taller, broader. His armor bore the mark of the first temple guard ever birthed. His shield gleamed with ancient glyphs long thought lost. He charged. The prophet unleashed everything: flames, screams, psychic torment. Minds snapped, trees withered, time bent. The guard met it head-on. He took the full blast of the spell, armor cracking, flesh peeling. But his hand did not release his blade. With a roarless strike, he buried it into the prophet's center, through muscle, bone, and the ancient evil bound within. The creature convulsed, then collapsed in on itself, like a building gutted from the core. The battle ended. The cultists were gone, not fled, erased. Not a single survivor, not a single word. The silent host did not speak, did not pause. They turned and vanished into the fog from which they came, the jungle swallowing them once more. Only their footsteps remained, only the silence. Chapter 15: Collapse of the Invaders. The final death knell of chaos did not come with screams, but with whispers. The jungle itself turned against them. Where once vines hung lazily from canopies, now they struck with purpose, slithering like serpents, wrapping around throats and limbs, crushing bone with slow, merciless strength. Trees, once still, now shifted imperceptibly when no one looked, blocking paths, confusing escape. The roots beneath the loam pulsed like veins, the very earth alive with intent. The last survivors of the chaos incursion were being herded, herded into slaughter. They numbered less than 100 now, tattered, blood-soaked, eyes hollowed by terror and nights without sleep. Each man bore the marks of battle, of disease, of the demonic corruption they had so willingly invited into their flesh. Their skin cracked like old parchment, leaking pus and black ichor. Their breath came in ragged gasps. But still they moved forward, toward the coast, toward some phantom hope of extraction. It was a lie. They were not retreating. They were being drawn in. At the edge of the Valley of Forgotten Suns, they found it. A clearing, ringed with stones inscribed in spiraling glyphs, the air heavy and thick, as if reality itself had grown tired. Strange lights flickered in the mist, too slow for fire, too alive for stars. And then the Lizardmen came. Not from the trees, not from the cliffs, from everywhere. Saurus warriors emerged from the underbrush, their obsidian blades already dripping with ritual oil. Croxagores burst from beneath the earth like living siege towers, mouths opening in silent, disciplined fury. Skink priests floated down on feathered platforms, eyes glowing with divine fire, whispering death in the language of the stars. But it was the Stegodons that ended all hope. 3 of them entered the clearing, their armored backs mounted with solar engines burning with caged sunlight. They didn't roar, they simply unleashed. Beams of pure, condensed light seared across the battlefield, turning chaos warriors into shadows painted on the trees before their bodies caught up, blasting apart into ash and chunks of charred bone. The smell of burning flesh was instantaneous and overwhelming. A Nurgle champion roared and charged, foam pouring from his ruined jaw. He swung his rusted flail at a Bastaladnon. The beast didn't even flinch. Its tail, adorned with sacred brass and jade, swung once, and caved in the man's entire ribcage. He folded in half, vomiting blood, eyes wide with disbelief as he collapsed, twitching. Another tried to flee. He made it 10 paces before a chameleon skink dropped from the canopy, slit his hamstrings with twin daggers, and drove a poison-tipped dart into his eye. He screamed for minutes. Chaos sorcerers tried to resist. They called upon the dark gods, tearing their own flesh, howling mantras in demonic dialects. The Lizardmen didn't allow it. One by one, skink priests raised staves of carved crystal and unleashed pulses of ancient anti-magic. The spells of chaos backfired, turning sorcerers into statues of salt and shadow. One man simply inverted, flesh peeling from within, bones folding inward until there was nothing left but a pool of liquefied regret. The last cluster of chaos warriors formed a circle, backs to one another, screaming oaths to their gods. The jungle offered no reply, only judgment. Saurus Oldbloods waded into their midst. One parried a desperate sword swing and responded by driving his blade up through the Chaos Warrior's jaw, the obsidian splitting through skull and emerging from the top of his head. He left the blade embedded, drawing another without slowing his step. A Croxigar tore through another group, his massive hammer reducing bodies to red mist. One man begged for mercy, his legs broken, his eyes wide, his hands raised. The Croxigar stared for a heartbeat, then stomped down, and all that remained was wet crunch and silence. In minutes, it was over. No survivors, no captives. The Lizardmen moved among the dead, finishing those who still twitched, carving sacred runes into the earth with their blades. The skink priests walked in slow circles, anointing the battlefield with a mix of blood and venom, purifying the site with fire drawn from sunstones. When the rites were complete, a hush fell across the valley. A stillness so complete, it felt as if the world itself exhaled. And then the ground moved. Roots slithered from the soil, vines reached down. The jungle took the bodies, dragging them beneath moss and muck, burying them in silence. The blood-soaked soil drank deep. The stones wept red. By morning, there would be no evidence of the battle. No bones. No answer. Only trees. Only leaks. Only whispers in the wind. The chaos invasion had not just failed. It had ceased to exist, and the jungle of Lustria thrived. Chapter 16. Aftermath. Among ruins. The rain came softly, like the breath of ancient gods mourning their lost children. It fell in sheets upon the battered remnants of war, on broken monoliths, charred stone, and crimson-streaked vines that still pulsed with residual heat. The jungle sighed with it, hissing and steaming as the rain cooled the scorched earth. The fires were dying, the screams were gone. All that remained was silence. Flaxland stood, battered but unbowed. The temple walls bore deep gouges from demon claws. Statues of the old ones had been blackened by sorcerous flame. Whole avenues were strewn with shattered bones, half-melted armor, and pools of blood that no longer belonged to anything human or cold-blooded. But the city lived. From the spawning pools, sacred steam rose. Their waters, once tainted with chaos corruption, now shimmered again with pure phosphorescent light. Skink acolytes moved through the ruins with reverent care, each footstep measured, each breath held. They chanted softly as they worked, songs older than language itself, their syllables rolling like warm water through the air. They cleansed the stones. They washed away the blood with blessed oils, brushed debris from glyphs with golden feathered fans, and burned sticks of fragrant sap to drive away lingering corruption. They carried bodies, Saurus, Skink, even Kroxigr, with ceremony, placing them upon altars of obsidian to be offered back to the jungle. Death for the Lizardmen was never the end. It was transition. The temple guard formed lines along the ruined thoroughfares, their shields still scarred, their obsidian blades still red. They did not move. They did not speak. Statues of vengeance turned to wardens once more. But even in victory, the cost could not be ignored. In the heart of the central pyramid, the golden palanquin of Zoltep lay shattered. The slain Mage-Priest was still, his vast, bloated body slumped among the ruins of his dais, his eyes half closed, his hands folded on his belly like a monarch in repose. He had not spoken since the beacon flared. He had not moved since the demon's scream ended. The skink priests gathered around him, eyes lowered, their breaths shallow. One stepped forward, shaking, and gently touched the ancient slan's wrist. It was cold, and yet power still radiated from within. Not the destructive, roiling chaos of battle, but the stillness of order, the implacable weight of a mind that had seen the stars rise and fall, and chosen silence as its last word. Zoltep was not dead. He had become something else. The skinks fell to their knees, pressing their foreheads to the stone. Outside the temple, the Lizardmen mourned in their way, not with weeping but with stillness. Saurus stood in rows before the temple steps, each one battered, bloodied, and proud. Kroxigors formed a circle around the fallen corpses of their brothers, smashing their weapons to pieces as offerings, scattering the shards into the jungle. From the forest came strange sounds, birds that hadn't sung since the first war horn, frogs whose croaks echoed with unearthly clarity, and insects returning to feed upon the dead. Life was returning. The balance was correcting, but it would never be the same. Not entirely. The jungle bore scars now. The land had remembered pain. And beneath the soft patter of rain, the skink scribes etched new glyphs into stone tablets, recording everything: the invasion, the sacrifice, the fall of Zoltep, and the extinction of the demon. They titled the tablets, "The Sundering of the Blood Tide." In time they would be buried beneath the temple floors, wrapped in gold and vine, placed beside other sacred memories. But for now, they glistened wet with rain and blood. On the highest tower, a skink priest looked out over the jungle, his feathers heavy with water, his heart still thunderous in his chest. In the distance, steam rose from the ruins of the battlefield. No banners, no cries, just the slow return of silence. But silence in Lustria was never to be trusted. It was always watching. Chapter 17. The Eye of the Old Ones. The stars shifted. It was not subtle, not the gentle glimmering change of night to dawn, but a wrenching, like the sky itself had been dragged across invisible chains. Constellations warped, ancient patterns snapped. Where once the heavens had told the tale of the Old One's design, now they blinked with uncertainty. And high above the ruined ziggurats of Tlaxlan, a single star ignited. Not white, not red, and blue, deep, cold, and watching. The eye of the Old Ones had opened. The Lizardmen knew what it meant. Not from speech, not from prophecy. They felt it, an instinct pulsing through their veins like lightning through roots. Every skink priest froze mid-chant. Every Saurus warrior stiffened, feeling the universe twist inside their blood. The stars were speaking again. But their message was not peace. It was warning. Deep within the temple of the shattered dawn, skink scribes pored over glyph stones that hadn't been touched in 5,000 years. Written in circular logic, mirrored symbols, and starlight-infused ink, they whispered truths that could not be uttered aloud. One line flickered and burned into the stone altar, though no fire touched it. When the eye opens, the second pulse shall follow. Zoltep had spoken of the pulse. Before his final silence, in his last trance, his voice had murmured it, barely a breath. Just once. Not the end, only the first. Now it made sense. Above, the blue star pulsed again, and across the sky another blinked to life. Then another. And another. The heavens were forming a pattern, a network of glowing points like nodes, the same configuration etched into the deepest temples, the same geometry buried beneath Lustria's soil. But something was missing, and something else was coming. In the western jungle, where the sun never rose the same way twice, the ground opened without warning. Not an explosion, not a quake. As though the earth were a lid, and someone had just removed it. From the chasm spilled shapes, impossibly tall silhouettes, bound in obsidian armor, their edges blurred like half-remembered nightmares. Not daemons, not lizardmen, something else. They moved without noise, their limbs twitching with arcane rhythm. Each bore the same symbol, a spiral starburst etched into their skull-like helms. They walked as if memory guided them. They carried tools, not blades, not axes, but rods of channeled energy that crackled at the touch. With one wave, they turned a copse of sacred trees into black glass. With another, they pulled light from the air, swallowing it. The jungle screamed. Birds fell from the sky, feathers still aflame. Insects died in waves, their carapaces cracking from pressure alone. Even the vines recoiled, burning where they touched the air around these newcomers. Lizardmen patrols saw them and attacked. A cohort of Saurusguard charged, roaring defiance, weapons raised high. They were erased, not killed, removed. One blinked, and his comrades were gone. Not blood, not bodies, just absence. The jungle recoiled, the stars pulsed, and the eye watched. Back in Tlashlan, the skink priests panicked, not visibly but internally. Their glyph speech became clipped, erratic. Some began to shed feathers. Others stared into the flames of prophecy altars until their eyes bled. One vomited black sap and began scribbling unreadable symbols on the walls with his own claws. Then the final sign came. The star map, carved into the dome of prophecy, shifted for the first time in known memory. A new glyph etched itself into the stone, hissing, burning, alive. Uxultak. The name was not a warning. It was a summons. They being long forgotten, older than even the slan, buried beneath 10 layers of reality. The glyph shimmered, then cracked the dome from inside out, spraying crystal fragments across the sacred chamber. Outside, the blue star pulsed one final time, and in its light the jungle shuddered. Somewhere in the roots, in the soul of the land, something opened an eye of its own, not of flesh, but of will, and it remembered everything. Chapter 18. Guardians of the Path. The wind had changed. It no longer carried the scent of blood or burnt jungle. It smelled older now, dust and stone, memories fossilized in air. The kind of wind that whispered through the bones of mountains and forgot how to breathe. In the deepest roots beneath Talaxlan, past the crypts where the temple guards slept, past the catacombs no skink dared map, lay the path of the pulse. A corridor of ancient design, not made by hand or claw, but by intention. Its walls weren't stone, they were memory solidified, glyphs that moved like slow water, their meanings too complex for mortal minds. The air there was heavy, alive, judged. At the center of this sacred geometry stood the Nexus core, a sphere of hovering crystal, suspended between unseen forces, humming with the resonance of 1,000 geomatic ley lines, converging into one perfect moment. It was the heart of the world, and it had begun to stutter. The core pulsed unevenly. Where once it beat with steady, rhythmic light, now it shivered. Fractures formed across its surface, glowing cracks that spiderwebbed outward, threatening to break the pattern. If the core shattered, Lustria would fall, not in flame or ruin, but in unbeing, a place untethered, forgotten by the weave of reality. The Lizardmen responded with instinct born from creation. They awoke the Guardians, the Kroxigger Alphas, massive, ancient, and sacred. Not simple brutes. These were thinking engines of violence, fused with geomantic instincts, their souls bound to the pulse of the world itself. They were never meant to patrol, never meant to fight armies. They were meant to hold a single place, a single line, forever. 6 of them emerged from the deep vaults, each a mountain of obsidian-scaled muscle and sacred stone armor. Their faces bore no expression, only duty carved in jagged scars and ritual burns. They bore weapons not made of metal, but shaped from condensed ley-line fragments, war hammers that sang when swung, blades that vibrated with destructive harmony. They were not sent to the core. They were born from it, and now they returned. But they were not alone. The path had been breached. From the shadows slithered the new threat, those obsidian specters born of the starfall, not demons, not mortals, entities of fractured design, constructed from half-memories and stolen geometry. They crawled through the ley-line cracks like parasites, devouring the very meaning of structure. Each one walked on inverted joints, their faces masks of nothing, their weapons long threads of razored light. The Kroxigger Alphas met them in silence. The battle that followed did not echo. Sound died before it reached the walls. The only music was the thud of impact, the crunch of collapsing physics, the shriek of crystal on bone, and the low hum of the Nexus struggling to survive. And Guardian swung his hammer in a perfect arc, and a star thing shattered into 1,000 mirrors. Another parried a whip of pure void, then crushed his attacker beneath a stomp so powerful it split the floor and birthed molten light. But they were clever, these invaders. They did not fight for victory. They fought to delay, to distract, to fracture focus. One Guardian turned his head for a moment too long, tracking a shadow that did not exist. That was enough. A blade of light struck him through the throat. He fell, not in agony, but with a grunt, a sound more of apology than pain. His body did not bleed. It flickered, then disintegrated into blue ash. The Nexus dimmed. The remaining 5 closed ranks, forming a circle around the core. It pulsed again, weaker. The glyphs along the wall blinked, urgent, panicked. One invader phased through the wall, emerging behind a Guardian, its limbs twisting unnaturally, blade aimed for the core. Held fast, too close, until one Guardian threw his hammer across the chamber, a blur of holy violence, and struck the creature mid-lunge. The being shrieked, distorted, imploded. But the Guardian did not celebrate. He walked to where his hammer had landed, picked it up, and took position again, bleeding from 6 wounds. Still breathing, still watching. Outside the chamber, skink priests gathered, their chants reinforcing the ley-line lattice, feeding the core with sacred syllables and offerings of soul fruit and moon blood. Pterodons wheeled above, their cries carrying energy downward. The entire city fed the battle. The last Guardian fell 3 days later, not from blade, from exhaustion. His body collapsed beside the core, arms still wrapped around the sphere, shielding it with his bulk. When the skinks entered, they found him motionless, still kneeling, still watching. The core pulsed, stable again, not healed, but held. And the Guardians, 5 now stone, 1 ash, were carved into the walls of the chamber, not as statues, but as sentences in a language only the stars could speak. They did not save the world. They kept it alive. For now. Chapter 19. The Spawn of a New Era. Beneath the steaming canopy of Lustria, deep within the jungles, undisturbed since the time before time, the spawning pools of Tlaxlan rippled. But this was no ordinary birth. The water shimmered not with moonlight, but with energy. Rays of raw geomantic current dancing across the surface in erratic pulses. Blue, green, violet, even impossible colors surged beneath the surface, twisting together in sacred rhythms no priest could read, no prophecy could explain. Then came the first ripple. The water split, not like liquid but like skin, and from within rose a skink. But not a skink, as the old ones knew. This creature's eyes glowed with soft amber and strange violet flickers, twin stars burning in sockets too sharp, too aware. Its scales shifted in hue as it breathed, reacting not to light but to intent. Glyphs shimmered along its arms and spine, alive, changing shape with each heartbeat. It looked to the sky before it looked to the priests. It did not bow. It waited. Skink priests gathered around the edge of the pool, their expressions unreadable, their feathers rustling with unease. This had not been foretold. No scroll, no box-scribed star chart, no whispered trance had prepared them for this. And it wasn't alone. From the pool came more, dozens, then hundreds. Each skink bore mutations, not of corruption, but of design. Some had elongated fingers tipped with membrane light, able to manipulate the smallest glyph constructs. Others possessed neck crests that pulsed in rhythmic waves, emitting subsonic tones that stilled the hearts of nearby jungle beasts. One bore a third eye centered on its brow, unblinking, casting an eerie glow that made the air ripple. One Saurus emerged larger than any before him, not by mass but by presence. His armor grew with him, crystalline scales that unfolded as he rose from the water, forming plate across his chest and limbs. He held no weapon. He was the weapon. His roar did not echo, it resonated, traveling across the geomantic lines like a wave, triggering ancient bells in distant temple cities long since abandoned. The Slan had not ordered this spawning, and yet the jungle had. The spawning pools had not received direct divine will. They had acted on instinct. The battle with chaos, the fall of the demon, the destabilizing pulse from the sky, it had all echoed down into the pools, like thunder through water. And now the land was correcting. It was arming itself. The skink priests attempted to speak to them, using glyphs, telepathic chant, even sacrificial blood songs. But the new spawn spoke first. Their words did not come from mouths. They came from the pool. It hissed, gurgled, bubbled, and then sang, a deep, thrumming tone as if the very marrow of the world had struck a chord. The glyphs on the new skinks' bodies flared in unison, and suddenly the priests understood. We are the ones born from after, the children of silence and fire. The pattern has shifted. We will learn it. We will defend it. We are not what came before. Not a warning, not a challenge, a statement. Then the violence began, not from the spawn, from the jungle itself. Wild beasts, once sacred, rushed the pools in madness. Horned serpents foamed at the mouth, tearing through skink defenders. A stegodon, crazed by some unseen force, trampled 3 handlers before being brought down with a harpoon through the eye. Birds rained from the canopy, their feathers aflame, and behind it all, laughter. Not human, not demon, but something that remembered being both. The new skinks moved before ordered, and raised his arm, and a glyph exploded mid-air, obliterating a charging jungle cat and a pulse of blue force. Another skink snapped his fingers, and vines responded, snaring beasts, wrapping around their throats, pulling them into the swamp. The Saurus leader finally moved. He walked straight into the chaos, unhurried, unblinking, and tore a feral Lizardmen in half with his bare hands. Blood soaked the pool's edge. He turned to face the others, and nodded. The battle ended in minutes. Not with retreat, with extinction. Whatever force had twisted the beasts fell silent. The jungle grew still, and the new spawn stood among corpses and sacred water, untouched, bloodied, victorious. They did not chant. They did not roar. They simply watched, as if waiting for the next wave. The skink priests recorded every moment, hands shaking, eyes wide, and at the top of a nearby temple, a slab shifted. It revealed an ancient glyph, one that had not been seen since the days when stars fell like rain. Juktalnetan, the first of the last. A new age had begun, and it would not be guided by prophecy. It will be forged by reaction. Chapter 20. Vigil in the Green Hell. The jungle breathed. Its exhales swept across the canopy in rolling waves, bending ferns and ancient trees like the bowing of subjects before a forgotten king. Lustria was silent, but not at peace. The silence was heavy, aware. It clung to every leaf and twisted root, soaked into the soil with the blood of invaders, gods and guardians alike. The war was over, but war in Lustria never truly ends. A patrol of Saurus warriors moved through the undergrowth like scaled statues, their obsidian blades still wet from their last engagement. Though it had been days since they'd met resistance, they were not hunting. They were watching. Each step they took was calculated, every footfall designed to echo nothing. Their tails swept behind them in perfect rhythm, clearing their path of leaves so as not to disturb the pattern of the forest. In the shadows above, chameleon skinks clung to branches, their eyes darting in 4 directions, blowpipes readied with poison that killed before breath could even draw alarm. They were the eyes of the jungle. And the teeth. In the center of what had once been the final chaos encampment, now little more than blackened ruin and fungal growths, a single stone had been raised, a crude totem carved from the shattered bones of fallen Lizardmen, pieced together by the few chaos cultists who had tried to survive the collapse. Glyphs were scratched into its surface, crude parodies of the sacred language, soaked in blood and desperate blasphemy. It still pulsed, faint but undeniable. Whatever had driven the chaos remnants into extinction had not taken their madness with them. A skink priest approached the totem. He was old, his feathers dulled, his eyes misted with geomantic fatigue. He walked slowly, flanked by 2 Croxigar, each of them scarred, each bearing sacred staves instead of hammers. They had not come to destroy. They had come to observe. The totem was still warm, not with heat, but resonance. A thrum beneath the stone, barely perceptible, like the final heartbeat of a thing that should have died long ago. The skink placed his palm upon it. His eyes rolled back. He hissed once, and was gone. Not dead, not unconscious. He gone. The Croxigor did not flinch. They simply turned to the surrounding warriors and nodded once. The Saurus formed a perimeter. Pterodons circled overhead, dropping sun crystal beacons that activated ancient glyphs. The ground around the totem began to glow. Then came the voice. It didn't speak in words, it hissed in pulses of emotion, waves of hunger, of hate, of survival. The jungle itself recoiled, trees leaned away, birds screamed and fled. The voice spoke only once, not from the totem, from beneath it. Not gone, never gone. We bleed, we wait, we return. The saurus closest to the totem exploded. His body flayed in an instant. Skin peeled into the shape of a spiral. His skull hovered in midair, then burst into flame and vanished. The skink priest opened his eyes and spoke. "We are not finished." He turned to the Kraxker, raised his staff, and with a word unleashed a column of jade fire that reduced the totem to ash and less. The resonance ceased. The pulse ended. But the warning remained. Back in Tlaxtlan, the temples were rebuilt. Xhotep's palanquin was sealed in gold and obsidian, placed in the chamber of eternal stillness, his withered form surrounded by relics from each battle he had guided. Skink priests performed the ritual of silence, placing sacred feathers across his chest, sealing his eyes with starlight-infused resin. He was not mourned. He was honored. The new spawn, the evolved skinks and saurus of the pulse, stood guard over the vaults now. They did not speak with the older castes. They did not dream. They waited. One stood at the edge of the temple, staring out into the jungle. Its eyes, those twin flames of color, never blinked. Below, a beast stirred. Something massive. Something ancient. It rolled in its sleep, beneath layers of root and stone, disturbed by the shifting of stars. The jungle whispered its name, not loudly, just enough for the trees to remember, just enough for the stars to blink once more. And in the canopy above, an unseen eye opened. Watching, always watching.